Okay. Hey, it's Alexander Lawrence from the Portable Infinite. I'm here with Mattie Safer, and we're going to be talking about a lot of great music today. And Mattie Safer, let's see, he's known from being in the Rapture for 10 years. He's also a member of Poolside. How many years in Poolside?
I've been playing with Poolside about 5 years now.
5 years. So that's kind of when most people heard of them. I mean, they've been around for a while, but they kind of been really active the last 5 years, like playing live. It was more like a studio project at first. And then you were doing Safer, which in the beginning it was kind of an R&B, and then kind of when the stuff I seen recently more post-punk kind of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, those were kind of two different things. I definitely was doing stuff like 10 years ago or 7 years ago that was more R&B, and then I moved back to New York and started more of a proper band and was doing more post-punk kind of stuff. Yeah.
And then, my favorite band this week, I can't, I've been listening to them all day, Lovetempo, and they're playing at Gold Digger September 14th. So everyone should come, everyone in LA, come on down, fill it up and buy a lot of merch. And okay, so the Rapture, it came out, the Rapture Echoes here. I have my copy still. I remember buying it over in St. Mark's Place, like the week it came out, it was like a big, for a lot of us in New York, it was kind of a big deal. It was, oh, the Rapture's album, it's finally out, after a couple singles, and that was an exciting time. And then a little later, you played CMJ at Roseland Ballroom with Mars Volta. Do you remember that? You remember
I
that?
do remember that. Yeah.
And it seemed like okay, that was my first time seeing you guys. I was like, oh, I've been hearing about this Rapture. I read about you guys in New York Magazine and just all these New York bands. And I'd seen by that time I'd seen a lot of them. And I think the Mars Volta. I think I left a little early because the Mars Volta. I think they only played 5 songs and then they cut the gig or something. Do you remember that?
Actually, I don't remember that part of it, but
but, but
maybe, yeah.
but I remember when you guys came out, you did some of the most of the first album. You did Oleo, and it was like, oh wow, these guys you're all on keyboards, and it's kind of cool. And then you kind of break into the regular songs and stuff. And like when I at the time and looking back, I mean, I my favorite New York bands are kind of like the Rapture, Secret Machines, TV on the Radio, and Kala. I think those are these bands like I mean, like something went wrong around the way. They should be like 10 times bigger than they actually were and stuff. But those were like the fun bands to go see. Like Interpol, they were just too serious, like I don't know about some of those bands that were people were into. But okay, so I saw you at Roseland Ballroom, and then I was back in LA and I saw you with the moving units at El Rey like a month later. And that was like one of those gigs in LA where you kind of felt like lucky to be there. It's like, oh yeah, this is like a big deal. The Raptors playing the El Rey. It's a pretty small place, and luckily I was friends with Jonathan Galkin, and he put me on the list for some of these shows and stuff. So yeah, I remember that show being a pretty wild show with like stage diving and people. You know, I remember like that was that your first big LA show, or you remember that?
Um, I mean, we'd certainly played in LA before, but I mean, as far as that was probably the biggest up, that was certainly the biggest up to that point. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
LA was always really good for Rapture stuff and is now great for Poolside. So,
yeah, and then soon after that, maybe like the next year, you toured with BRMC, and I ended up catching it in that was around the time you played Coachella, and I remember seeing at the Regency Ballroom or whatever in San Francisco, and then you guys came out, and I go, wow, these guys definitely killed it. You guys were even better the third time. And then BRMC came on and half the audience left, they already started going to the after party or something, So yeah, BRMC was one of these bands. They were pretty good. I was more friends with them at the time, but I think they were just at the time they were just too serious. It's like, oh yeah, we're doing this real serious music, this big stage. And the Rapture at the same time was kind of like this party band. It's just like, oh, it's a fun band, and you guys just came across like real cool. And I mean, it was like it was all about the groove, kind of the music. It was about I was really focused on you and the drummer, because it was to me it was about the groove. It was like the anybody could have been a singer, really. Any comment on that?
I mean, I love playing, I find playing with Vito, the drummer, who's also now the drummer in Poolside too. I love playing with him. And, I mean, I think that, I think the thing that made Rapture great in the beginning years of me being in the band was just that everybody brought a high level of a high level of ability, but also like a willingness to get weird. And like we were super committed, and we were all just like, there was always a lot of push and pull, but the push and pull like was really what I think led to the songs being interesting. And I think I was a fan of the band before I joined the band. They had been around for about a year or so, on the West Coast before, and they moved to New York, and I joined them when they moved to New York. But I saw them on the tour out to New York, and now I just loved the energy. I thought that, like, I think Luke was a great singer and brought a lot of like brought a lot of good chaotic energy with his guitar playing. Like, Vito, same, like really good drummer, like good, like just like kind of at that time they were really chaotic. Things changed a little bit once we got playing in New York, but like, yeah, I don't know. I definitely, I think that there was something that was when everybody was like trying their hardest, but with the idea of it being like a collective, and like that we were going to like work together and write together and, be together. That was when the band was at its best.
Well, I think the good thing about the Rapture is you have an identifiable sound. When a song kicks in, the vocals, the weird, the angular guitar stuff, the groove, you kind of know it's you. I mean, some of the bands at that time, like Strokes, I mean, they sound like other bands. It's like, oh, it sounds like Tom Petty, or this sounds like the Television or something. It's like and Interpol like had the Joy Division thing, where they were definitely drawing off other music. I mean, you guys were drawing off other music, but you kind of brought it into your own thing too, and kind of like, and when you listen to those records, when I hear one of your records coming on, I go, oh, I know it's you, because it's like it's got like those elements that you kind of crafted over the years.
Well, thank you. I mean, I do also like Interpol and the Strokes, but to
Yeah.
each their own.
And there was a you opened up for the Sex Pistols around that time. What was that, just a one-off, or was that a whole tour?
That was a one-off. They were doing like a one-off thing at Crystal Palace, and they decided to make like a festival of it. So it was like us and Trail of Dead played, the Libertines played, I think the Dropkick Murphys played, and more too. And I remember, I mean, it was certainly by far the biggest gig we had played at that point, because I mean it was in like a stadium. But also, I mean, it was an interesting gig because, like, it was mostly people who were really just there to see the Sex Pistols, and there was like hours and hours of bands that honestly like weren't really anything that they were interested in seeing. So they spent most of the bands got like booed a lot, and like I remember like Trail of Dead got like bottles of piss thrown at them and shit like that. So I took it as like a badge of like honor that we didn't get like booed as much as the other opening bands on that gig.
And then you did the other big tour you did was at that time was Curiosa. So that was like The Cure, Rapture, Mogwai, Interpol, a few other bands. I mean, and I felt that was about the fifth or sixth time I seen you guys, and you definitely killed it that night too, in LA, and it definitely maybe even blew The Cure off the stage. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm going too far here.
I
So
appreciate it, but they were amazing on that tour.
yeah,
My favorite part of that tour was getting to watch The Cure play like for like 30 nights in a row or whatever it was. Like, so they were really in great form at that time. I haven't seen them recently, so I don't know how they are
yeah.
now, but
Yeah, I mean they're definitely they've been doing it. They've been at it, and they're playing like these big playing stadiums, and still, 40 years later, so they definitely, and they have this big, they've built up this fan base, and they're pretty good. So what was up with the U2 Paul McGuinness management thing? When did that come in, and was that a good thing, or what do you think about looking back at that?
I mean, I think that came about. So when everything kind of started kicking off with the success of House of Jealous Lovers, and then sort of the ensuing like label like frenzy and like touring, going over to England all the time, and like all that stuff, we didn't have management. Like our dreams at that time really weren't like anything on the scale of like thinking that we were going to be in the kind of situation that we found ourselves in. So we quickly started working with a friend of ours who was managing the IAS, and his his like assistant, who was also our friend, and we knew them from Plant Bar, which was the
Right.
bar in the East Village where Luke was a bartender there, and like we used to do DJ nights there, and so we knew these people sort of socially from there. There were some, but they came into like they came into a situation that was like already a bit of a mess because all of this stuff was happening, and we didn't even have an agreement with DFA, let alone with any of these other labels that were, we had sort of taken the ill-advised approach of being like, oh, let's just put the record out and just kind of like, we'll figure out the business afterward. So they came into that situation, but there were just some personality clashes, and we had to part ways. But we kept on with Lauren, who had been Asif was the manager, and then his assistant Lauren. We kept on with her, and we're working with her, but she didn't have any prior experience like in music management. She was incredibly smart and like good with people, but at a certain point, we just felt like once we were in this like major label system, like we needed management that knew how to navigate that world a little bit. So I remember like at the time, like there was like this big book that you could get that would have like, it was like a physical book, and you would look at it, and like it would have like all these management companies and like lists of their rosters and their contacts and stuff like that. And looking through, and I think it feels a little abstract to do something like that, but I guess that I know that Luke, for one, was like an enormous U2 fan. Um, but also, they also had, it was a small management company. And I think at the time, the only other artist was PJ Harvey. So we were sort of like, well, it's a small company, and so we'd probably get focused attention. And they're working with PJ Harvey too. So it's not like they only know how to do this kind of like stadium rock kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe let's give it a go. And I think, for the most part, like from a business angle, from on like all, in terms of like handling all the business and stuff like that, they were great. They opened up a lot of opportunities. They helped keep us like solvent and all that kind of thing. In hindsight, like they were probably not as like in touch with like the like pulse of what was happening in like underground music in a way that made it that sometimes made certain things difficult to do, or like they would take a lot of explaining. They would be like, why would you want to do that? And then we'd have to explain it from our perspective, which we were essentially like coming from these like indie and punk backgrounds and not knowing anything about it. And I mean, I think all in all, like it was a good relationship. It served us well. But it certainly, I think with anything, there's going to be some give and take. So that was like there was a little bit of a cultural disconnect sometimes with them.
And then we got the second one right here, the second big one. And you kind of started working with Paul Epworth. At the time, I mean, he had only done like Future Heads and Block Party and a couple records. I mean, now he's like kind of like the go-to guy in British production, you know. But you kind of started with them like when he that was probably like his third or fourth big record at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we met Paul when we met Paul. He was the house sound man at 93 Feet East, a club in London. We went there to play a party for Output Records, which was
Oh yeah.
the Trevor Jackson's label that the first Rapture records came out on in the UK in conjunction with DFA. Um, and like at the time, so that was on our first European tour, and like um James Murphy was touring with us at the time, and he was like doing our sound in a lot of situations, but obviously that was something that we kind of knew wasn't going to be a long-term thing. He didn't want to become a touring sound man again. So he met Paul, and he was just like, oh, this he's really talented. You should hire, you should see if you can hire him as your sound man. So we started working with Paul doing front of house for us for like a year or so, until we eventually parted ways. And in that time, he was also working in studios. And yes, he started working on like the Block Party record and Future Heads and stuff like that. And he also had his own band, Lomax, who had like played with us a couple times too. So when we were trying to figure out who to make a record with, because we weren't gonna go back into the studio with James and Tim from DFA. But so we wanted to work with someone that we sort of knew and felt comfortable with and felt like understood where we were coming from musically and culturally. And so since knowing Paul, that was like that was actually a pretty easy choice. And then we also brought sort of paired him together with Ewan Pearson, who was, a electronic producer that we all loved, and we felt like would be able to help, bring a different side of production to the record as well. And so, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was just listening to the second record, and the first record seems more like a cohesive thing. This one seems like there's like two or three different ideas. There's some like electronic stuff. There was three songs that sound like maybe it could have been on the first record. What was going on there, you think, with this one?
Well, I mean, I think it was a couple of things. I mean, part of that is also I can't remember what if it's just one or two songs, but we also did one or two songs with a different producer. We worked with Danger Mouse
Right.
on the title track, and he definitely had like a very like different like perspective on like what he thought the band should sound like. Which loved working with Brian, but like, him working with him and working with Paul were two very, very different experiences. I also just think that internally by that point, like, things had kind of fractured a bit, or more than a bit. Like, I think that it just felt like, rather than being like we're all like putting our all into like working figuring out these songs and working on these songs, there was like just more kind of like songwriting ego stuff, and like more of like, oh, this is like what this song, like I want to be I'm a real songwriter now, and like I want to craft this beautiful song, and like just like not trusting each other as a band and not working things out in the same kind of way. And like, I think that it shows a bit in like in the production, although there were certainly a fair share of fights too with in the DFA years too, so I don't know, like.
So it was a constant battle. So there seems to be like a lot of controversy over this song, "No Sex for Ben." Like it was a big hit in Australia. It was like your biggest hit maybe at the time or something, or no?
uh, I mean, I think, it was funny. It was a song that was made for the Grand Theft Auto 4 video game. Um, and at the time, we actually, going back to like 2003, we had like met with Timbaland because he just really loved, like really loved the song House of Jealous Lovers, and like he just really wanted to work really wanted to work with us in some capacity. And at the time, nothing really came of it. Um, and then as we were getting out of, so after Pieces of the People, our record label decided they weren't gonna pick up the option on our record or on our contract, so we were gonna be free agents. And at the time, Tim and Justin Timberlake both, they were, they were one, just been in their own personal careers, like doing extraordinarily well, but they were also collaborating on a lot of things, and they both had record labels, and they both really loved the Rapture, and they both really wanted to sign the Rapture to their record labels, like as sort of a joint venture. So sort of in the midst of all that, this opportunity to make a song with for Grand Theft Auto came along, and No Sex for Ben was sort of like a song. It was a song that we had tried out for Pieces of the People we love, but that just didn't really it didn't really work out that well, and for whatever reason, like sometimes a song just doesn't work in the studio, so it didn't make it onto anything. We were like, well, we have this song, like we have this opportunity, and we have like, and we're working with these people who have the budget to make this work, and Tim wants to work on something, so why don't we just try doing this song with him? And it'll be also kind of a good way to test out what the process, what it might be like to get into that kind of creative relationship with a producer like that, because in the way that Timbaland produces a record is very different from the way that like Paul produces a record. It's I think a lot of like for I don't know what his process is like now, but at the time, like a lot of what he was doing was coming up with a lot of music and then bringing it to an artist, and then they write a song over it. So whereas with Paul, we were writing songs and then going, and then Paul was figuring out how to make them sound good. So it's a very different approach. This was, in a way, kind of closer to working on No Sex for Ben was closer to the Paul approach probably than what Timbaland was probably used to getting, in that we were bringing in a song that we had already arranged and performed out sometimes and stuff like that, and then it was kind of and then he was kind of just listening to that demo and reworking certain aspects of the song.
So like up to that point, the band pretty much did like live takes of songs, and then when you get to Timberland, you're more like a top line person or something like that.
I mean, not as much in this case, because we were bringing in the music, but he did he reworked the groove of the song. He reworked the drums on the song. He like added in like some additional guitar stuff, and I think that
Were you doing live takes back then, or in the earlier days?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as like the controversy around the song goes, I mean, I assume you just mean in terms of amongst the band members, like how different people felt about it.
Well, because like I mean, like Luke is a good singer, but like when you jump on and do Sister Savior or these other songs, I don't really see any difference. It's not like Ringo's coming to the front of the stage and singing. It's more like it's Paul McCartney versus John Lennon. It's like the same. You guys sound very similar in a way, and it's like it's no drop off. It's not like anything different. It's like so, like I saw a video of you guys playing real early in a record store, and Luke is wearing like lipstick. He's jumping on the drums. You sing a song, he knocks over your mic and stuff. I'm going, then why does this guy got to be the center of attention all the time? It's like, and I mean, when you sing and you play, it just seems real natural and stuff. And he just it just seems kind of weird to me. I don't know. You have any comment about that?
I mean, I think that it seemed like there was and as far as what there was often like a tension within him of like on the one hand like sort of having this idea of like wanting to be like we're a band and we all support each other and all this, but then also like really wanting like being like I'm I'm like I have this special quality. I'm a star. Like I should be this is my band. Like I'm at the center of things. Like I think that like um he like so he was always I would say like he was supportive of me singing sometimes, but then he would sort of act weird about it and like um try to like take songs back or like be like, oh actually I'm gonna sing on this instead, or being like just being like kind of like checked out and like not really like I mean the a feeling that I got, and this I think is part of what started hurting the band's sound a little bit during the Pieces era, was that a lot of times like um Luke was sort of, it felt like he was kind of passive aggressively like not giving his best to things that he wasn't singing on, or like using the opportunity to become like sort of a guitar hero and like really just play in a way that was different from the way that he might play on one of his own things. And if you tried to talk to him about it, he would just like sort of blank you. And I don't know, it was a difficult, it became a difficult dynamic, and it felt um there, I mean, there were some things that came out of it that were cool, but it was hard to navigate because he wasn't very good at communicating at that time. And I mean isn't now either, because I haven't spoken to him for like 5 years, so
Well, well, I mentioned No Sex for a Band because it seemed like, I mean, you did the first record, second record, and then we heard about the No Sex's band, and then we heard like Luke had left the band, his mother had committed suicide, he had gotten married, had a kid, and then he's back in the band, and then no, Maddie's out of the band. So like, how did and 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 then it was over a couple of years too, so there wasn't any
yeah.
like firm statement. So like you didn't really come out, and we didn't really know you were out of the band for till maybe even 2011 when they started reforming. And oh hey, where's Mattie Safer? It's like definitely, I mean, I could see you not playing with Gabriel or something, or being a trio, but like I don't know, I thought you were definitely an important part of the band. And I don't even like the third record doesn't mean anything to me really.
I mean, I think that, so we got off of tour, and in 2007 we got off of we did like our tour with Daft Punk, and then got off of that tour and kind of immediately went into like trying to write another album. And I think in hindsight we probably should have taken some time off and let everybody kind of like chill out, like regroup, like maybe explore some things on their own, all that kind of thing. But we kind of just were immediately, and probably influenced by the fact that we were out of our contract with our record label, sort of being like, all right, let's go, let's keep on moving. And over the course of that last tour, so yeah, Luke's mother killed herself while we were on the tour, while we were in the touring cycle for Pieces of the People That We Love. And I think between that and I think just sort of like feeling like musically and personally kind of isolated from the rest of the band, after a few months, Luke decided he was leaving the band. So um so Luke left the band, and I think again that might have been a point where we should have taken a break and like taken taking steps, but we were just trying to figure out what to do, and so I just kept on working on music with Gabe and Vito, and it was going all right. But after about 6 or 8 months, Luke came back and he was like, "Guys, I made a mistake. Like, I really want to be in the Rapture again. Like, I've changed. Like, I've learned. Like, I'm gonna be different. I'm gonna be positive. Like, all this kind of stuff." And it was like, we decided amongst ourselves, we were like that if anybody didn't want to do it, then we wouldn't. But I don't know. I felt like not that I didn't. I felt. I think that Beto and Gabe were both like, yeah, we should have him back in the band. And I remember feeling like I have to back up a second. So when he wasn't in the band, that was kind of like a bit of a revelation to me because I sort of suddenly it was like, oh, it's like really nice not having this person who's bringing this like all this like negativity and like sort of passive aggressive like and unstable behavior like all the time. Like this is like I just feel mentally better not being in a rehearsal space with Luke for 5 days a week, like trying to bang out an album and just feeling like he had been so checked out of like, he would just go to rehearsal and just sort of like sit in the corner and just like play guitar by himself. And like, it was really hard and like frustrating. So when that period when he was out was like, okay, this kind of shows that this could be different from what it is, from what it's been. Because, the Rapture was, for all intents and purposes, the first real band that I was in. I was in like some bands in high school, but I moved to New York straight out of high school and joined the Rapture. So it was kind of the only thing that I'd ever known. So when Luke said he wanted to come back, I was really conflicted because on the one hand, like I was really enjoying not making music with Luke. But on the other hand, I always felt uncomfortable with the idea of that we were going to continue being the Rapture without Luke. I mean, to me, like that would have been like, I don't know, like when the Velvet Underground did like a record without Lou
Yeah.
Reed or whatever. Like, like for whatever not saying that Luke was on a higher level than anyone else. I just felt like, I would have felt the same way about doing a Rapture record without Vito. Like these are the these are the people that were like in the band, especially Luke and Vito. They literally did start the band like before I joined. So I was like, it's not really my place to tell Luke he can't be in this band that he's been such a huge part of. But I also kind of knew that I wasn't going to be able to continue in the band once Luke was back. And I sort of made a go of it for a little while, but my heart wasn't really in it. Like it was, and it just didn't feel good making music with him anymore once he came back, even though he was sort of trying at that time was sort of trying to be on his best behavior as far as how he was acting in the band and all this stuff. So yeah, after like 6 months of trying, I was just like, hey, like I'm out, like I can't do this anymore, and left the band.
Well, he said in interviews at the time he was the laziest person in the band, and he never like helped carry the gear, and he was also an alcoholic during that time or whatever. And I don't know if his memories, sometimes with alcoholics, their memory isn't very fuzzy, accurate. The memory isn't that very accurate at the time, so it's like he might look back at that time as different than a sober person, like
And I would say with Luke is that his recollection of things is tends to shift around a lot depending on what he's trying to like what point he's trying to make at a given time. I read some interview where he said that Vito hadn't spoken to him for 17 years or something like that, and I'm like, that's like obviously not true, but I mean, I don't know, his sense of history is often based on his feelings. So, but I would say, but if that he said that, I mean, I would say that it is true that he was, I mean, part of the thing that was driving me crazy and why I was sort of felt like it was time to leave the band was I felt like he wasn't really trying the same way that he had in the best years of the band, you know.
Okay. Here,
And yeah.
well, here I want to. Here, I think it's. I still have a few questions here, so let's cut it off, and I'll send you a new link for part two
Okay.
right now. Okay, so let's. This is the end of part one. Come back for part two here.
Okay.